Hello, hello, hello. I'm so excited because so many awesome things are happening today. This is the of Golden Creative Stock, a podcast where we're going to talk about the rich and multifaceted experiences of Black and Brown creatives. I'm your host, CT Luna, or you can call me Cynthia, and also the author of the upcoming book, Brown Beyond Borders Emerging into Golden Multidimensionality, which explores so many of the themes that we're going to be touching upon today. I am absolutely thrilled to kick off our series with an extraordinary guest, Shari Dunn. Shari is a true polymath. She's an accomplished journalist, a former attorney, news anchor, CEO, university professor, and her work has been cited all over the place, the Wall Street Journal. She's written for and been quoted by Time, as in Time Magazine, The Hill, Fast Company, so many. She holds a bachelor's in philosophy from Marquette University and a JD from Northwestern Pritzker School of Law. She's an American Leadership Forum Fellow and has been honored with numerous awards, including the Executive of the Year Award and the Women of Influence Award. Most notably, Shari is the author of Qualified: How Competency Checking and Race Collide at Work. It is a groundbreaking book, truly resonated with me. I have spent the past few weeks listening to it on my travels. So we're going to just start exploring the themes from that work, Shari. Your journey across the diversity of the professional fields that you're experienced in and rolled up your sleeves in, and how you're giving voice to experiences that have long gone unnamed. So we'll also talking about the term competency checking and gosh, so much, your recent travels, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm going to wrap up here. Welcome, Shari, to Golden Creatives Talk. I'm so thrilled to have you here.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm really glad to finally that we get to talk and chat like this. I think today is a really interesting day to have this conversation. I don't know if you know what's going on in the States today, but Politico put an article out yesterday where they got access to private group chats of young Republicans, and it is everything people thought it's everything many people thought they were. They are racist, sexist, homophobic, violent. And these are people who, one of whom actually works at the Small Business Administration for the government, who see themselves as superior and feel they should be elevated in workplaces. And it's at the heart of the crux of Qualified, is that the question about diversity, equity, inclusion, the question about qualifications it's never about that. It really, at the end of the day, seems to come back to a restoration of white supremacy and what can be done to do that. And this question about whether or not people of color, women are qualified is a red herring. It's a trick, a sleight of hand. And seeing these messages just reconfirms that. And it also reconfirms something I always thought was that young people are not going to save us from racism. I mean, I've heard people say that, and I think it is a unsophisticated view, but I've heard people who make a lot more money than me as consultants say such things. And it comes from people not knowing the kind of material young people have been getting for the last decade or so on streaming platforms, Twitch, Discord, Instagram. I don't think people have been aware that there has been an ongoing effort to radicalize young people toward extreme right-wing white supremacist thinking. And so what those texts show is that that program has worked, and it has been working, and that it is a program. So I just wanted to kind of bring that up because, people of color, Black folks in particular, are put in a position where we have to defend our intelligence and capability, and yet this goes on. And people like this are elevated into the highest offices of the land. So it is, it's a thing.
It's a thing. Wow, you right out the gates with all the things, and I love it. I wanted to kind of talk to you about your career journey, and actually, I think
Mhm.
one of the things about your career journey that that actually illustrates exactly the point that you're making here. I mean, you have the qualifications, you've done all the things, you have the experience.
All of it.
I can see you've got your degree due, you know.
Mhm.
So let tell us a little bit about your varied experiences, the range of experiences, and I kind of feel like those experiences led you to writing Qualified. So how did
Yeah.
your experiences lead you to becoming the author of Qualified?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I was talking to someone somewhere. I'm vague because I can't remember. I've been so many somewheres and someone's, but talking about how life is something you can only fully understand over your shoulder.
Mm,
You can only fully appreciate it or see how it works looking backwards.
mhm,
But yes, I mean, I started when I was at Marquette University, which was a long time ago. I was interested in issues of social justice. Marquette is a Jesuit institution, and they really emphasize learning for learning's sake, which I have to give the Jesuits a lot of credit for that. It was a learning institution that was, challenged and challenged things in your community. But we had a lot of issues. We had a world history class that only looked at European history. And in doing
mhm,
so, it makes it seem like there is no other history and that other people haven't done anything. And that actually became an organizing point when I was in college. So I ended up being
mm,
the head of something called the Marquette Integrated Leadership Council. We had, discussions with the dean. We had campus protests. We had politicians come talk, all kinds of stuff. So I was a campus radical, I guess you could say, around race and knowledge and connection even then, And I remember some people in my mother's church was like, I think it was the pastor said, well, some people should go to school to get an education. Like, I shouldn't be doing that. But my mother, my family was not like that. My family was
mhm,
very much like, yeah, you should tell people what's what. And then going back even further, my mother's family, when I was a kid, her brothers and sisters would sit around and they would debate things. They would talk about topics of the day. They would talk about Black history. They would talk about a lot of things, our family history. So I really had the ingredients there. But I like to say when I went to law school, I like just totally took my brain off. It was like
mhm,
I was in college and law school. I think when you spend 4 years so serious under so much pressure, you want to break. And I did not, I really disconnected from that work and from that side of me while I was in law school. It's like partying in law school, doing law school, having, fun in law school, crazy. But that part of me just kind of wasn't present as much as it had been in undergrad. And I think it's because I was just exhausted. And then,
mhm,
but it was still there because I ended up taking a law and social justice class. I interned at a law firm one summer, and one of the projects was how could the law firm help this county take away benefits from retirees? Well, my mother was a Milwaukee County employee and was going to be a retiree, and I thought, if this is what law firms do, I don't want to do this. And
mm,
I ended up becoming a nonprofit attorney. So I work
mhm,
for legal services, and which is a quasi governmental legal services program. I did divorce and custody for victims of domestic violence for 10 years. So obviously, I'm seeing the results of social inequities,
yeah,
unfairness, how primarily our clients were low income women. There were one or two men, but almost universally women. Seeing inequities, even across race, how people are treated in the legal system. And then from there, I went to Washington, D.C., where I did national work around funding
mhm,
that system and training attorneys. Then I went to New York and became a funder of that system, running a foundation. And then I became a journalist for a
Mhm.
decade, where even in being a journalist, these issues of equity and fairness. I remember I did a piece when I was in Texas on domestic violence and a woman who had been murdered. And so these things still stayed with me.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, and then I started running a nonprofit in Portland, did that for 5 years, and then came to run my own consulting firm. And in everything I did, I saw Black people, myself included, being questioned more, having to
Yeah.
prove more, having to do more in
Yeah.
every environment. And it was just like, what? Why is that? What is this? I mean, you know what it is? It's race based. You know, it's racism, but
Yeah.
and then as a consultant, when I started working with companies and working with individuals, I was hearing the same things over and over and over. People were getting similar reviews, having similar challenges, almost having the
Yeah.
same language. So I thought, okay, somebody's got to do something. And well, I'm somebody. And so that's how the book
Mhm.
came to be.
A lot of personal experience as well as just, I guess, interactive experience went into that, into creating that book. I want very briefly for you to talk a little bit about your writing process. I mean, because you're a journalist, that's a deadline orientation thing, and also with the legal background, they do heaps of writing. So just curious to understand your writing process, getting the research together, getting the information on the page, and coming up with a really quality book. I'm very like I listened to your Audible so many times on the trip.
Oh,
So
wow. So you've
talk
heard
about
my
your
voice
writing
a lot.
process. Yes.
Um,
I actually like
well,
that. I like that.
oh, Oh, well, I have to tell you, I'm not a natural writer. And I tell
Mm.
people that all the time. In fact, writing for television news will make you illiterate. When they first brought the websites to television news people were like, what am I supposed to do with this? I'm not a print journalist. You know, the way
Uh-huh.
you write for television news is really specific. It's a conversational writing because you're writing scripts. So
Mm.
you write things in ways that don't always make sense. They probably aren't even spelled correctly because it's you're trying to mimic natural speech on air.
Mhm.
So you're not
Mhm.
writing sentences or anything like that. So I did that for a decade. So
Mm.
when I left television and had to go back and write sentences, I was like, what? What structure? You know, it was really
Mhm.
trippy. So I was not a print journalist. So
Mhm.
television news doesn't write like that. So that was very difficult. And being a lawyer is a very specific type of writing. It's almost like academic writing. So,
Yeah.
and funnily enough, when I sent my first draft into my editor, she said, "Oh, this is it's a little academic. Like we want to break it up and make it more conversational." And because that was, the closest writing that I had was the academic writing. So my writing process is very different than I think many others. I am an
Mhm.
auditory person who wrote
Mm.
a book. So
Mhm.
what that means is I had to find auditory ways. I had to find ways to translate my verbal thinking into writing, which is tricky. And when I first started writing, I tell the story about how I used to get up at 5 a.m. because a friend of mine in law school is a best-selling writer, and he gets up at 5 a.m. and writes, and I wasn't writing nothing. And I was seeing a therapist at the time, and I told her about it, and she said, "Well, do you get up early for any other reason?" I was like, "No." And she's like, "Well, why are you trying to be creative when you don't, you know?" So once I got past how I was supposed to do it, then I started doing
Mhm.
it how I did it. And how I write
Right.
is a combination of things. I might record, I might speak into
Mhm.
my phone, record something, just thoughts, ideas, even sometimes whole ideas come. Then I get that
Mhm.
transcript. Then I take that transcript and I start writing off of that. Or I might sit down and
Okay.
I have an idea, like I have an idea about where I'm going. I'm going to write this out. Then I'll go back and research. I'll go back and research.
Mhm.
I'll be like, is there a way to justify this? And if there isn't, there isn't. And if there is, there is. Now, I recognize that a lot of writers do it very differently. They make this really great outline, they get all their research done, then they start
Mhm.
writing. That is not how I write. Of course, I have an outline, which is usually the book proposal, which is quite detailed. But other than that, my writing is almost inspirational, you might say, but there is a process to it, but it is a process that works for me and how my mind works, which I
Mhm.
have come to understand is different than, say, a traditionally way you would explain somebody to write. And I think that's important for people to understand because I realize that for me, it took me so long in my life to write a book because I didn't think I could do it the right way. See, the right
Right.
way was such a big threat in my head. Like, oh, I can't outline that. I can't, I don't know if my sentence is going to be correct. Like, all this process was in my way. And then when it was like, no, the value in the writing is your ideas, your ability to
Mhm.
connect things, how you see things. That is the writing part. The rest of the stuff is editing or figuring that out. That I did not fully appreciate that until I was much older, and that unlocked the ability of me to write. So it's a messy process, but it works for me.
My process is pretty messy too. What I really enjoyed about your response was you're revealing that you almost competency checked yourself
Mhm.
from potentially
Yep.
writing qualified. So I'm hoping that you can read to us a passage to just clarify what competency checking means. I have finally understood what it means having listened to your book, but if you could share with us a
Sure.
passage, I'd really appreciate that.
Yeah, well, I wanted to come up with language for what was happening to people. I knew, it's like saying racism is broad, saying
Yeah,
workplace discrimination, that's big. But what are the
yeah.
mechanics? So that is what the goal is. And I have here, there are three primary ways competency checking is deployed in the modern workplace. The first is the assumption of Black intellectual inferiority and or lack of qualifications. This can manifest in low expectations, marginalization, and extreme micromanagement. More simply put, if someone assumes consciously or unconsciously that all Black people are intellectually inferior, they may question the person and their qualifications more closely during an interview, and once hired, pay more attention to their work while looking for any mistakes. The second method of competency checking is the expression, particularly of surprise or unease with open displays of Black intelligence, which can trigger requires or demands to confirm how it was acquired, whether it is the result of rote memorization or actual integrated knowledge. This can manifest as dismissal, quizzing, argument, and tokenization. If a Black person knows something that their white coworker doesn't already know, the coworker's reaction isn't, I didn't know that, but more often it is, how do you know that? And I have to tell you, anytime I do a public reading, even in the UK, people preset the second part of that. That's how common that is for Black people. How do you know that? Black people can
Mhm.
finish the sentence and I don't have to say it. So the third method of competency checking is activation, specifically the feeling of fear when confronted with a Black person who holds any authority, especially someone in a leadership position. This can manifest as a request for identification, undefined feelings of unfairness, anger, unease, and what I would describe as an autoimmune level rejection of Black leadership. So those are the three primary expressions. And so
Mhm.
activation, expression, and assumption. And it really, it's like when I say to people, like when you say housing discrimination, okay, but when you say mortgage lending, then you get it. So that was the
Mhm.
goal with trying to come up with these three key ways so that people can see this way impacts leadership, this way impacts hiring, this way impacts evaluations, just to be able to trace it more clearly.
Yeah. When I was thinking about when I was thinking about your work, listening to your work, um, I was thinking how the word competency checking is less triggering than the words discrimination and racism, especially when get into that workplace context where you might be in a position of um, consulting or even just sharing, like through an ERG, it's some
Mhm.
kind of DEI initiative. Um, and it's also more specific than bias, which has become a new word that's somehow palatable for for non othered audiences. Um, and I feel like with the term competency checking, you can accomplish so much more change in workplace contexts or even with your clients. Um, so I see there's like a power in sort of like creating this term and enhancing our vocabulary to have these conversations.
Yeah, that was the goal. The goal was to really give people something. And as you know, having listened to the book, the first three chapters are context setting, really helping to,
Yeah.
because what I found when looking at books on race and even some of the really well regarded ones is that some people do the what really well, or they do the how, or they do the why, but very few people do
Mhm.
the how, what, and why in the same book. And
Yeah.
I thought it was really important to do that in this book because I can't ask you to change something you don't fundamentally think needs to be changed. You don't know why. So I needed to
Right.
do the what and the why, and then tie it as the book goes on into the how. And so getting people, but it's definitely not design. I mean, it's design. Racism is the top level, but it's a
Yeah.
big word, and it
Yeah.
doesn't help. Like just like I said, housing discrimination is true. That is the true word. But there are
Yeah.
subsections, and if you are dealing with mortgage loan discrimination, that remedy is different than if you're
Hmm.
dealing with redlining, right? So I want to make
Right.
sure that I talk about this in the book, but I think one of our problems is we have been using the wrong remedies for a long time because we have the wrong assumptions about what's wrong.
Yeah. I'm so glad that you keep like laying things up for me. So I also wanted to ask you to read a passage from your book about equity and where you were talking to your client about equity, just to sort of level set, because I think then we can go back to the beginning of our conversation today.
Sure. Well, this comes from chapter 4 called The Myth of Qualifications. And just a teeny bit of setup. I mean, what I wanted to do with this chapter is there is a false notion that there was some point in time in the United States when we were a meritocracy, when only merit
Hmm.
mattered. And that's never been true. It's always been a class, economic based, access based system. And the only time merit starts to matter is when the out group wants in. And
Hmm.
then you can trace it. It's the only time. So really, merit and qualifications are really you think of them as a castle. They're the turrets and the walls of a castle designed to keep the masses out and only let a few in. But behind that wall are people who always had access. And their
Hmm.
standards of merit and their standards have always been different. So I wanted to kind of explode that myth. And so the chapter actually starts with talking about Harvard and the grades of Franklin Delano Roosevelt. But I do have this chapter where I think really gives us some insight. So it's the chapter is called The Gentleman's C, which is that at Harvard for many, many years, your only qualification getting was to be rich and white. That was your
Hmm.
qualification. And getting a C was considered good, not for grade inflation, but because anybody who was working hard enough to get A's or B's, what are you, poor? I
Right.
mean, a C was enough if you were wealthy and in the right class to go everywhere you needed to go. So that's the
Hmm.
thing. So this is from that chapter. I also get some insight when I'm doing consulting into white people's fears. In one coaching session, I was working with someone who was incredibly frustrated with a recent meme they had seen on Facebook, a visual representation of the difference between equity and equality. The three panel picture shows kids of different heights in front of a wood fence watching a baseball game. Under equality, each kid is standing on an identical box, but the fence is too high for the smaller children to see over. Under equity, the kids are standing on their exact number of boxes they would need to be able to see over the fence. Or in the case of the tallest child, no box at all, since they can already see over it. Under justice, the wood fence is replaced with no fence, removing the need for boxes entirely. At first, my client couldn't articulate what exactly about the picture upset them. Finally, they said emphatically, "It's unfair." I was baffled. I asked them to walk me through what exactly was unfair. After a minute or so, with some emotion, they said, "Well, it took away the tall kid's advantage. That kid had an advantage and now it's gone." This person was articulating the fear of losing what I call the accidental advantage. I explained to the client that the tall kid didn't do anything special. They were tall as an accident of genetics. Conversely, the shorter kids didn't do anything wrong, and to my mind, weren't asking for anything special, just for the ability to watch the game. Those explanations, unfortunately, did not assuage my client's fear, a fear that, however unfounded, didn't come from nowhere. The upset they experienced when confronted with the image was about loss, a loss they couldn't fully articulate, but could feel acutely as fear. And to them, the fear was real. So from there, I, throughout the rest of that chapter, used the tall boys analogy or the tall
Mm-hmm.
boys club, because
Mm-hmm.
it's this inherent advantage. So when people, and it was I wouldn't say that was specifically the issue for this person, but I will say that when a lot of people talk about being anti-DEI, that's what they're talking about.
Yeah.
They know there is an advantage for the tall boys club, and they want to
Right.
keep the advantage for the tall boys club. And what DEI does is remove their special advantage, and that is what they think is not fair. Not that we are
Right.
unqualified, but that's unfair.
Right. And I guess that's what we are seeing playing out from some of the things that you were posting on Substack today, to ICE doing what it's doing, to more than 300,000 women being laid off since February. I think it's actually very close to 400,000 now. That's the
Mhm.
count. So I think that that's really what we're seeing playing out. And competency checking is, I guess, how we've been seeing the signals for for what we're witnessing now, which is more drastic competency checking. I mean, just locking you out entirely without
Mhm.
the charade of performance reviews, vague performance
Right.
reviews,
Well, I mean,
putting
I
people through
think
tests.
that's a restoration of white supremacy. I mean, we just have to call it
Yeah,
what it is. I mean, white
yeah.
supremacist ascendancy, which the young Republicans, notes really make clear. That is their goal. That is their aim.
Yeah.
There is no other aim. Um, and anybody who doesn't understand that is being made a fool out of, especially if they're a person of color who thinks that the political party that supports the restoration of white supremacy is ever ultimately going to help them. And then, you have people like Marjorie Taylor Greene the other day, who's a Republican congresswoman, who said Republican men are afraid of Republican women. No, Marjorie, they're afraid of women, period. And they don't want women in ultimately positions of authority. And so there are a lot of people who seem really unaware that there
Mhm.
is an ascendancy toward a restoration of white supremacy. And that is what's going on over there. Now, as far as competency checking within the workplace, I think this is one of those things that if companies can still think about how they hire, they can still think about what they do. They can still, these things are things that companies can still address, because a diverse workplace and consumer base is good business. You have people like Robbie Starbuck saying they're abandoning their fiduciary duty. No, you're abandoning your fiduciary duty when you do not consider the diversity of your customers, clientele, business, the world,
Hmm.
your staff. That's abandoning your fiduciary duty. So, it's this really complicated moment, but it's also very simple because at its core, you have a group of people who are determined to restore us to the days of the gentleman's sea, you know?
Right. Yeah. And so my next question actually take us across the Atlantic because at least one of the things that I observe, I've been living in Central Europe for just over 10 years, nearly 12 years, actually nearly 13 years now. Um, and and I've met a lot of Black and Brown women, some of whom also grew up in the United States and spent a large portion of their lives in the United States. But one of the things I hear from other Black and Brown women is, well, I'd much prefer to deal with the issues that exist here in Europe. So they're not denying that there's racism and discrimination and competency checking and all of the hurdles. But they're just saying, you know what, it's easier here. And quite frankly, after what I've been witnessing over this year specifically, I would agree
Mhm,
wholeheartedly. So I guess my question is, what brought you to the UK? Because
mhm,
I have heard a lot of comments, especially out of the UK, because I'm English speaking, so I tend to speak with a lot of people who are based in the UK. Like, well, it's different, or well, it's not like in America, and it's sort of like, but it's still the same thing. So, why'd you go
mhm.
to the UK, and
Yeah.
um, what did you experience there?
Yeah, well, I went to the UK to present at a conference for Black barristers and solicitors, so attorneys for US folks.
Hmm.
They break it out. And that was the first main reason. And then the second reason was to promote my book. I had a PR marketing woman who's based in the UK, Nicola, who runs FP Comms. Yeah, she's very great. So if anybody's looking for marketing help, she's amazing. Who put together a series of wonderful events for me. And then another young lady, Nikki, who works with the Young Africa Center, put together a reading there for the book. So it was really a combination of, speaking and then promoting the book. What struck me when I was there was how much the Black people there said this book was just exactly what they experienced. They did not think it was that different. They
Hmm.
thought they know the historical stories diverge a bit, but it all
Hmm.
comes back to colonialism. I have a
Hmm.
chapter in the book called "It's Not Just Black and White or American," and I talk about the fact that its root is colonialism. Like the way colonialism worked is and works is you have to convince people they are not as intellectually good as you. That's how
Hmm.
you colonize the mind as you colonize the body, right? So all of us who've been touched by colonialism are in a competency checking based paradigm because colonialism is empowered to check our intelligence. It is the standard, and then we have to get in line under it. So what I was blown away by, and I was glad that it resonated, but sad that it resonated, that there was no daylight. People were not like, well, they were like, this, people ask me this all the time. People,
Hmm.
one gentleman there, Henry Bonsu, who worked for BBC, now works for Time Radio. There was a big article in him a couple years ago for being too intellectual for the BBC
Hmm.
and being fired so they did not see a distinction in these workplace issues. I mean, the only thing they were like was, oh my God, I feel like I'm not going crazy. Oh my gosh, this is some of the exact same things that happened to me. So I think the UK and the US are very connected for one thing. We
Hmm.
move in a similar way. Our roots are deeply connected. We are intertwined in that way. Yes, class, accents, things like that are overlays in the UK. So the UK definitely has more
Hmm.
expanded issues. But at the end of the day, colonial mindset about Black intelligence specifically is universal. The colonial
Yeah.
mindset is that Black intelligence is inferior to it. That's it. And
Hmm.
anytime Black people evidence intelligence, anyone from the colonial perspective feels empowered to check it, to ask, to verify, to demand, to all the three elements, you know, everybody feels empowered to do that. And then, you know, when I was writing the book and working on it, I got a letter, a message on LinkedIn from a woman in France who was like, oh my God, this explains so much that we have the same thing here. And, you know, so I suspect, you know, and in the book, I look at France, the UK, and Canada. And, you know, Canada is this place that a lot of Black Americans love. And, you know, but Canada has very similar race based issues in the workplace, the challenges that the United States does. So, what it tells us is this is a universal problem where
Mm-hmm.
Black people are, and it's not our problem, it is a colonialistic mindset problem. The other thing that recently people have talked about a lot, especially with Black Americans thinking about leaving the United States, is we forget that we have a privilege when we leave. And there is the American passport, American accent privilege. And as a Black person in the UK or in other countries, we might perceive the interaction of racism differently because of that privilege. That privilege is carrying us into spaces and places that people who do not have the passport, who do not have that accent, have a harder time. And it's the reverse here. I mean, I have a friend who was dating a guy, he's African, and he went to work early one day here in the States. And a security guard stopped him. And the security guard was very aggressive with him before he spoke.
Mm-hmm.
Once he spoke and he heard his African accent, the guy noticed the security guard relaxed and totally changed, you know, became curious, where are you from? Oh, you know, and he thought, oh my God, if I had have been a Black American, he would not have
Mm-hmm.
responded to me in that way.
Mm-hmm.
So the accent privilege kind of goes both ways. But I think as Black Americans, sometimes we miss the fact that people are interacting with us as Black people, sure, in other countries, but we also carry that privilege of American
Mm-hmm.
accent and American passport. And so people, I'm not getting the same treatment as someone from Nigeria who has a Nigerian accent in the UK. I'm not getting the same treatment someone from Sierra Leone who's in, you know, Belgium or whatever. I'm not. They people are in
Right.
fact interfacing and associating me in a very different way. So I think we have to remember that. I like to say racism is like there's this commercial. I think it's still on, but it says you're colorblind, I'm sorry, you're nose blind to how your house smells. I love this commercial.
Mm.
Like we don't know how our house smells, like because we live in it, you know, and then it's just designed to make you nervous and get you know, sprays for your house. But anyway, you know, we don't know what our house smells like because we live in it. We're used to the smell. Somebody else comes in your house and they're like, ooh, they can. So that's
Mm-hmm.
the thing about racism. Like I can be nose blind to it, and somebody else comes in, they're like, ooh, can't you see how racist it is here? Right. But I
Mm-hmm.
don't notice it because either I'm in it or because of the privilege that my Americanness carries, I don't smell it, if that makes sense, in the same way.
Right. Right. You touched on so many things, and my brain's going in all these directions. One of the things I find curious now that I'm looking at the activities that are happening in the United States, particularly on immigration, because it's kind of like there's a layer to that immigration thing where you have, you know, Black African Americans, and then you have Black Americans who naturalized, and then you have
Mhm,
other people who aren't, you know, white European women and men who might have also naturalized or might only be green card holders. What's happening with the shakeup, in your opinion, on the immigration level? Because I'm having a hard time understanding um, what's going to happen to people who really the only reason why they're in the US is because their ancestors were brought over as slaves. They were enslaved people, and you know they were born in the United States. They have the privilege of an American passport by birth, but do they really hold that
Yeah.
privilege? And also for naturalized Americans, African Americans.
Yeah, well, I think naturalized citizens, period, should be concerned.
Yeah.
I think that there is a real push in the fever dream insanity mind that is Stephen Miller to put all of our citizenship at stake. You may have seen some people's visas were rescinded for
Hmm.
saying negative things about Charlie Kirk online. I mean, it's insane. And I normally don't say his
Hmm.
name out loud because it's not even worthwhile to say his name out
Hmm.
loud. Just the young man who was assassinated because it's not worth it. But that's insane. That's
Hmm.
insane. That is not a free society. That is,
Yeah.
and it's so there have been talk about denaturalizing people,
Yeah.
naturalized citizens, trying to pull that. We have birthright citizenship, and pulling birthright citizenship is going to be much harder than denaturalizing naturalized citizens. But that
Hmm.
is the fight over birthright citizenship. The birthright citizenship is going back to the Supreme Court. And should the Supreme Court invalidate birthright citizenship, we're in trouble because that would
Yeah.
mean generations of Black people to come would not have birthright citizenship, or birthright citizenship would be limited in what way, you know?
Hmm.
And to be honest, this fight goes all the way back to slavery. They've been mad
Yeah.
about birthright citizenship since we got it. I mean, that's the facts. Black people had to become citizens because we had lived here for 200 plus years as not citizens. Because we weren't
Yeah.
citizens because we were like the equivalent of a cow or a
Right.
dog. People should remember that chattel slavery was very different than slavery in other parts of the world and in other expressions. Chattel slavery has existed in history, but it's not the dominant type of slavery. And chattel slavery means just that, chattel. So we
Hmm.
wouldn't have been citizens because we weren't humans under that system. We were the equivalent of owning a cow, a horse, or a dog. And a cow and a horse or a dog isn't a citizen. So there was no reason for us to be citizens. So once birthright citizenship came into being to establish our citizenship, they have been trying to undo that since then. I mean,
Hmm.
so there is this through line in United States psychopathy that doesn't seem to die, and
Yeah.
while they claim the birthright citizenship fight is about all these illegal quote unquote immigrants, it's also about an anger that we ever got it, that we ever,
Yeah.
because the United States was supposed to be a place for white people, period.
Yeah.
Even though this is a land inhabited by native folks who lived here already. They just
Yeah.
set that aside. They were the
Yeah.
only folks who are supposed to be citizens here, and they want to try to wiggle away to get back to that. Would the Supreme Court invalidate birthright citizenship? Maybe. I mean, this court is, I did a Substack on this. This court is lost. The court is fallen. This is we
Hmm.
no longer have a functioning rule of law. The
Yeah.
Justice Department only carries out what the president says. You have the attorney general screaming and yelling at senators like she is having a mental breakdown. You have a Supreme Court that has given the president unlimited powers. Now, Joe Biden apparently didn't have the power to cancel student loans, but this man has the power to invade states. So anything is possible. But I think rescinding current birthright citizenship is I think that's impossible. I think because you would then trigger a civil war, like literally, like not
Yeah.
figuratively. You would trigger a civil war to try to invalidate existing birthright citizenship. But what would happen going forward? Well, that's a whole nother question.
Yeah. From here, it's looking like it's headed in that direction.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
um, I guess we're going down a direction that I wasn't prepared to go down, but I find it really interesting that this is happening in a democracy.
Mm.
And I'm also appreciative of, actually, this is going to segue into my next question. I'm very appreciative of some of the technologies that are available, particularly social media, because the fourth column of the US democracy and other democracies around the world has been um, manipulated to the point where it a lot of times it's just a megaphone for the ruling party. um,
Mhm.
all of that to say, I use Substack, and I really appreciate the way that you curate the current events that you talk about. Um, and I also appreciate the way that you put things into context. You
Mhm.
reach into the history, you relate it to current events, you also have anecdotes, and it makes the content in Qualified very powerful. Actually, that's a perfect example of how you pull it all together. And then also your Substack. And so I guess I want you to talk a little bit more about Substack, why Substack, what you want to accomplish there, and then
Mhm.
after, if you head in that direction, tell us about the Zorro project.
Yeah, well, Substack, I was kicking around for a platform that worked for me. I tried TikTok, which I had some good success on TikTok. I had some really viral
I bet.
things on TikTok prior to the election, but TikTok is tricky and it's difficult to really get a handle on because, it's not so much a writer's platform. It's a
Mm,
shorter, more powerful, quick hit visual platform. So so I found Substack and I thought, oh, this is great because I can write and I can develop a following and I can maybe monetize the platform because obviously doing this type of work, it takes time away from my consulting. So how can I monetize this work? So it seemed like a perfect, perfect match.
mhm,
And then I am an auditory person, as I said. So a lot of my newsletters, people ask me how I do my newsletters. I tell them just like this, just like this. I talk into this thing right here. I say, well, here's the thing about Politico. And I start talking, talking, talking. And then I get a transcript from the thing. And then I use that transcript and that becomes a newsletter. So I'm talking writing. So that's how I'm
mhm,
able to do it, like that. But Substack, just like every other platform, has its drawbacks. Substack
yeah,
says they believe in free speech, and there was the great Nazi issue. So a couple of years ago, when they do platform a lot of right wing people who have a lot of abhorrent ideology that is, I think, past the level of free speech. I think it's Substack is funded by some people who have close ties to the administration. They're taking more money from those folks. And what does that mean, for
mm,
voices on Substack? So these are all questions I wrestle with, but my goal for Substack right now is to grow potentially an audience that's big enough that I could take with me somewhere
mhm,
else that I could transport. It's life is spy versus spy. Like it's an old
yeah,
cartoon of spy versus spy. Like it's you're trying to figure out what you can get, what they can get, what you can get from them. And so there is nowhere to run. That's clear that these
mhm,
platforms are owned by, Donald Trump is going to put together a group of people to take over TikTok. So
yeah,
they will have a clean sweep of almost all major social media platforms, from Facebook, Meta, that has Robbie Starbuck, the anti-DI activist on his board, who would be
mm,
fired for the comments he makes online on their board, to TikTok, which would be owned by conservatives who Donald Trump chooses, to Substack that has funding. I mean, there's nowhere to hide because this tech
X Twitter.
money, X Twitter, yeah, X took over Twitter. So they've they've consolidated
Mhm,
their hold on social media because they knew it was powerful. They
yeah,
saw the power of it during George Floyd protests. They saw the power of social activism, and so they decided to kill it. Because
yeah,
one thing that white supremacy culture, patriarchy, and money cannot tolerate is people of different races seeing class solidarity, demystifying each other, coming to know each other, and support each other. They can't
yeah,
have that. So if they can break that, that's what they want to do. So my goal with Substack is to grow my audience to a point that it's a big enough audience that can decamp to something else that that I own or that's separate. That would be great.
mhm,
The Zora project is a project I have on Substack to try to track the stories and information from the over 300,000 Black women who this year have lost their jobs. Many of those women do come from the federal government, but many are also from the private industry. And as you said, that number is growing every day. In addition, Black unemployment is now almost double white unemployment in the United States, or
Mm-hmm.
maybe it has exceeded doubling. So
Probably.
my goal is, like, Zora Neale Hurston was a writer who went around collecting the stories of African Americans who had still been enslaved, and at least one person who had come off a slave ship. And she was paid through a writer's project from the government back in the 20s, 30s they had. And she went around and collected these stories so that they wouldn't get lost. And that's what I think is important with the Zora Project, is I'm trying to collect the stories of Black women so that these stories don't get lost about what is happening. I think we are in the end of the second Reconstruction in the United States. The first Reconstruction ends as Jim Crow begins. And for all practical purposes, we are very much there. And unfortunately, what people don't know about Reconstruction is Black people at the time lived just like we live today. They lived in integrated
Mm-hmm.
neighborhoods. They had jobs. They were served in Congress. They were building some wealth. Yes, there were millions of impoverished, formerly enslaved people, but Black people were really getting a foothold. And that became a threat to white supremacy. And Jim Crow came in to reestablish all functional elements of slavery except physical restraint. And honestly, the prison system took care of that. So, it feels a bit like we are at that end of Reconstruction, and these stories could get lost, that there were
Yeah.
Black women executives, that there were Black people running businesses. And so the Zora Project is designed to try to keep those stories from getting lost.
Where do you envision those stories going? Hopefully not in a capsule that will be buried to be discovered 10,000 years from now. Do you want to
Well,
publish it in a book or? Mhm.
I mean, I hadn't thought about that. I mean, first of all, I have to say it is very hard to get people to share stories. People are very fearful, which tells you
Yeah.
about the environment we're in. There is so much fear, and it has come upon us so fast, like night
Mhm.
falling. It's really been something. And so, I wouldn't really think of monetizing their stories in that way, because I think it's hard enough for people to share their stories, but really curating their stories on the Substack and maybe taking them over to another platform where people can read the stories, understand the stories, using the stories as information for other media pieces, such as writings or
Mm.
studies, things of that
Mhm.
nature, I think would be a good, but mainly just documentation. I mean, we
Yeah.
really are at the documentation stage of the end of Reconstruction. Like, I saw Henry Louis Gates, he does this Finding Your Roots, and Chris Rock had an ancestor who was one of the Black Congress people in South Carolina. South Carolina had a majority Black state legislature during Reconstruction. Chris Rock did not know that. And he did not
Mm.
know that because their pictures were burned into a bonfire. Information about their
Yeah.
presence was destroyed. So
Yeah.
we're at the destruction phase. Like, I'm trying to save information that will be destroyed. I mean, they literally are destroying things, deleting things off websites, trying to remove things out of the National Museum of African American History, trying to remove things out of History Museum. Like,
Yeah.
we literally are at the destruction phase. So
Yeah.
I'm literally also just trying to document.
Right. Huge task. You're reminding me about how little I know about my ancestry. A lot of it's been lost. All I know is that so I was born in Trinidad, and my
Mhm.
father was from Trinidad, and all I know is some kind of like vague, like, yeah, I think our ancestors were enslaved, and our ancestor one of our ancestors fought for the British in the Civil War, and that's how they ended up in Trinidad as part of the exchange. But again, it's kind of like these vague memories of. I think I
Mhm.
remember somebody mentioning, and so it is sad to have entire populations of people who are disconnected where and who they come from and where they come from. So
Well, and the thing
what's
of it is
happening
to
is,
recognize that is that's been done intentionally.
yeah,
It's not like you just your family's, it's just like Chris Rock did not know that because he's stupid. It's intentionally
no,
done.
yeah,
I
yeah,
am lucky in the sense that my mother's family is able to go back. I have their picture right above me here to my great grandfather, great grandfather, great grandparents who were both
hmm,
enslaved. And I have a picture of
hmm,
them and I know their stories. And we know their stories as far as they can go. My great
right,
grandfather who was enslaved, he was a child when he was sold, so he doesn't have a memory of his parents. So it
right,
stops because of intentional separation, but not
yep,
because he didn't want to know. But I'm lucky to have that, and as a
yep,
result of
yep,
that, I have a much clearer understanding of the line from slavery to me because I
yeah,
can see the line from slavery to me. You know what I mean?
yeah, absolutely. And it really underlines the importance of documenting the stories of what's happening now,
Hmm.
because that will be somebody's roots. That will be somebody's connection to
Hmm.
their future. So I'm just so glad that you could share about the Zora project. So they can find out more about the Zora project
On my
on
website,
Substack, on your website.
yeah, on Substack and my website. My website's really easy. It's the THE and then my name, SHARIDUNN.com. So the website is thesharidunn.com or the Substack. Hmm.
Hmm. And Substack is
Yeah,
sherrydunn.substack.com, right? Yeah.
.com. Yep.
Um,
Hmm.
cool. So, and then your book. Let's tell folks where they can get your book. They can get it on your
Yeah.
website, I think.
Well, my website tells you where you can get the book, but it's available everywhere books are sold. There it is. You can get it on Amazon. You can get it on your alternative bookseller, discounters, everywhere. It's like I said, it's on audiobook. And you can get it in the UK. You can get it in the US. It is not translated yet into French, so that you can't. Because somebody did ask me that, but yeah, it's available everywhere books are sold.
Awesome. Are there any final words? I do have a fluffy question for you, if you don't mind,
Oh, I don't
before we
mind.
wrap
The
up.
one thing well, before you give me the fluffy question, I want to say that
Uh-huh.
I am glad that you reached out because I really want my time on Substack not to be just extractive. I want it to be collaborative. And I think that it's important that we raise each other up on this platform and give people lift and view. And I think it's easy for people to come on and I don't mean this in a mean way, but people do gobble up viewers and resources. And it's great. It's awesome. I want
Hmm.
people to succeed, but I also want people to think of what is their commitment to community on the
Yeah,
Substack, not just what can I get from it. So, yeah.
yeah. I really appreciate your posts, and your commitment. I don't catch every Friday, but your commitment to your Friday afternoon lives, where you just kind
Yeah.
of share a consolidation of all the events that happened that
Mhm.
week.
Yeah, so many events.
Yeah, and they seem to be getting longer and longer. So
Yeah.
yeah, because there's just so much going on. All right, so I think we've covered everything, Sherry. Thank you so much for joining.
Oh, wait,
I
what's
am.
your fluffy question? You had a fluffy
Oh,
question.
my fluffy question was, what is your absolute favorite thing to do, online or in real life?
What is my most favorite thing to do? Um, well, this is very boring, but I was
Sleep.
thinking about this yesterday. Yeah, I was thinking about this yesterday because the weather is turning cool now in Oregon. But I have like a little balcony area that you can sit on. It's a nice size. And my favorite thing to do is to have coffee sitting on my balcony while the hummingbirds have their nectar, because I really have a whole hummingbird situation going on, and I make nectar for them a lot. Frequently, they're very demanding that it be fresh, so I it's really like a second job. But my favorite thing to do is to sit on my balcony and have coffee, and while they're having their nectar, and just enjoy being at peace. So
Yeah.
it's not that exciting, but
It's very exciting. I saw my first hummingbird a few years back. So yeah,
because they don't have
they're
them in Europe.
fascinating.
They don't have them in
They're
Europe. Which blue,
fascinating. Yeah, they
because
don't.
someone asked me about England, would I move to England, would I move to Europe? And then when I found out there were no hummingbirds, I was like, I don't know about that. I live someplace. I love my little hummingbirds.
They're fascinating. They're so small, and it's like, that's a
They're so
bird.
small.
It has bones and tiny feather. Anyway,
They're
Sherry,
super
this has
smart. I have to
been.
tell you. Yeah, I'm sorry. I give you.
Uh-huh.
You say
Go ahead.
hummingbird, you get a lot of nerd from me. They're very smart. They know who feeds them. They look in my window to see if I'm in here,
Hmm.
to see if the nectar would be fresh. That's how
Right.
smart they are. They're quite inner. They're wild animals, and yet they're very good at communicating to me what they want.
Mm.
If they want it changed, if they, they're very good at communicating. So yeah, it's a weird deal. So sorry, I had to nerd out about hummingbirds.
Oh, I have a surprise for you when we get off this call, but I am so thrilled that we could have this conversation, that this is the first conversation of Golden Creatives Talk. I really hope that we'll get to have another conversation sometime in the future.
Mhm.
So we've talked about where folks can find you. So I think that pretty much wraps us up. Our next
Well, I
Golden
would ask
Creatives
you to
Talk.
do
Uh-huh.
a favor for me, because hopefully this will recording, I can put this on my Substack. Where can they find
Sure.
you? Because you
Oh,
assume my folks, if you cross post it, don't know you. So
they can find me. Thank you, Sherry. Thank you for helping me out with my promotional efforts. You can find me at brownbeyondborders.substack.com, or my off Substack world is ctluna.com. But Substack is really where I do most of my writing and posting and interacting. So thank you so much. Thank you for joining me. We're going to wrap up this inaugural talk, and Friday is our next conversation with an author. More on that. Stay tuned. Thanks again, Sherry. Bye,
thank
everybody.
you.